The Panzerkampfwagen IV, commonly known as the Panzer IV, was a German medium tank developed in the late 1930s and used extensively during the Second World War. Its ordnance inventory designation was Sd.Kfz.161. The Panzer IV was not originally intended to engage enemy armor, that role being allocated to the Panzer III. However, with the inadequacy of the Panzer III becoming apparent and in the face of Soviet T-34 tanks, the Panzer IV soon assumed the original role of its increasingly vulnerable cousin, the most widely manufactured and deployed fully turreted German tank of the Second World War. At some 8,500 examples, the Panzer IV was used as the base for many other fighting vehicles, including the Sturmgeschütz IV assault gun, Jagd Panzer IV tank destroyer, the Wirbelwind self-propelled anti-aircraft gun, and the Brandbar self-propelled gun. The Panzer IV saw service in all combat theaters involving Germany and was the only German tank to remain in continuous production throughout the war. Upgrades and design modifications intended to counter new threats extended its service life. Generally, these involved increasing the Panzer IV's armor protection or upgrading its weapons, although during the last months of the war, with Germany's pressing need for rapid replacement of losses, design changes also included simplifications to speed up the manufacturing process. The Panzer IV was partially succeeded by the Panther medium tank, which was introduced to counter the T-34. Although the Panzer IV continued as a significant component of German armored formations to the end of the war, the Panzer IV was the most widely exported tank in German service, with around 300 sold to Finland, Romania, Spain and Bulgaria. After the war, Syria procured Panzer IVs from France and Czechoslovakia, which saw combat in the 1967 Six-Day War. Some 8,553 Panzer IVs of all versions were built during World War II, with only the Stug 3 assault gun tank destroyer's 10,086 vehicle production run exceeding the Panzer IV's total among Axis armored forces. Development history. Origins. The Panzer IV was the brainchild of German general and innovative armored warfare theorist General Heinz Guderian. In concept, it was intended to be a support tank for use against enemy anti-tank guns and fortifications. Ideally, each tank battalion in a panzer division was to have 3 medium companies of Panzer IIs and 1 heavy company of Panzer IVs. On the 11th of January 1934, the German army wrote the specifications for a medium tractor and issued them to a number of defense companies. To support the Panzer III, which would be armed with a 37mm anti-tank gun, the new vehicle would have a short barrel, howitzer-like 75mm gun as its main gun, and was allotted a weight limit of 24 tons. Development was carried out under the name Begleitwagen, or BW, to disguise its actual purpose, given that Germany was still theoretically bound by the Treaty of Versailles ban on tanks. Mann, Krupp, and Rheinmetall-Borsig each developed prototypes, with Krupp's being selected for further development. The chassis had originally been designed with a 6-wheeled interleaved suspension, but the German army amended this to a torsion bar system, permitting greater vertical deflection of the road wheels. This was intended to improve performance and crew comfort both on and off-road. However, due to the urgent requirement for the new tank, neither proposal was adopted, and Krupp instead equipped it with a simple leaf spring double-bogie suspension, with 8 rubber-rimmed road wheels per side. The prototype required a crew of 5 men. The hull contained the engine bay to the rear, with the driver and radio operator who doubled as the hull machine gunner, seated at the front left and front right, respectively. In the turret, the tank commander sat beneath his roof hatch, while the gunner was situated to the left of the gun breech and the loader to the right. The turret was offset 66.5 mm to the left of the chassis centerline, while the engine was moved 152.4 mm to the right. This allowed the torque shaft to clear the rotary base junction, which provided electrical power to turn the turret, while connecting to the transmission box mounted in the hull between the driver and radio operator. Due to the asymmetric layout, the right side of the tank contained the bulk of its stowage volume, which was taken up by ready-use ammunition lockers. Accepted into service as the Versuchskraft Farug 622, production began in 1936 at Fried Kruppgrassenwerk factory at Magdeburg. AUSF. AUSF F1. The first mass-produced version of the Panzer IV was the Ausführung in 1936. It was powered by Maybach's HL108TR, producing 250 PS, and used the SGR75 transmission with 5 forward gears and 1 reverse, achieving a maximum road speed of 31 km/h. As main armament, the vehicle mounted the short-barreled howitzer-like Kampfwagen Kanon 37L 24 75mm tank gun, which was a low-velocity gun mainly designed to fire high-explosive shells against armored targets, firing the Panzergranate at 430 meters per second. The Kw-37 could penetrate 43 mm, inclined at 30 degrees, at ranges of up to 700 meters. A 7.92 mm MG-34 machine gun was mounted coaxially with the main gun in the turret, while a second machine gun of the same type was mounted in the front plate of the hull. The AUSF was protected by 14.5 mm of steel armor on the front plate of the chassis, and 20 mm on the turret. This was only capable of stopping artillery fragments, small arms fire, and light anti-tank projectiles. After manufacturing 35 tanks of the A version in 1937, production moved to the AUSF B. Improvements included the replacement of the original engine with the more powerful 300 PS Maybach HL120TR, and the transmission with the new SSG75 transmission, with 6 forward gears and 1 reverse gear. Despite a weight increase to 16 t, this improved the tank's speed to 39 km/h. The glacis plate was augmented to a maximum thickness of 30 mm, and the hull-mounted machine gun was replaced by a covered pistol port. 42 Panzer IV AUSF Bs were manufactured before the introduction of the AUSF C in 1938. This saw the turret armor increase to 30 mm, which brought the tank's weight to 18.14 t. After assembling 40 AUSF Cs, starting with chassis number 80,341, the engine was replaced with the improved HL120TRM. The last of the 140 AUSF Cs was produced in August 1939, and production changed to the AUSF D. This variant, of which 248 vehicles were produced, reintroduced the hull machine gun and changed the turret's internal gun mantlet to an external one. Again, protection was upgraded, this time by increasing side armor to 20 mm. The German invasion of Poland in September 1939 came to an end, it was decided to scale up production of the Panzer IV. which was adopted for general use on 27 September 1939 as the Sonderkraft Fahrzeug 161, in response to the difficulty of penetrating the armor of British infantry tanks during the Battle of France. The Germans had tested a 50mm gun, based on the 5 cm Pak 38 anti-tank gun on a Panzer IV AUSF-D. However, with the rapid German victory in France, the original order of 80 tanks was cancelled before they entered production. In October 1940, the AUSF-E was introduced. This had 50 mm of armor on the bow plate, while a 30 mm appliqué steel plate was added to the glacis as an interim measure. Finally, the commander's cupola was moved forward into the turret. Older model Panzer IV tanks were retrofitted with these features when returned to the manufacturer for servicing. 206 AUSFs were produced between October 1940 and April 1941. In April 1941, production of the Panzer IV AUSF started. It featured 50 mm single-plate armor on the turret and hull, as opposed to the appliqué armor added to the AUSF-E, and a further increase in side armor to 30 mm. The weight of the vehicle was now 22.3 tons, which required a corresponding modification of track width from 380 to 400 mm to reduce ground pressure. The wider tracks also facilitated the fitting of trackshoe ice sprags, and the rear idler wheel and front sprocket were modified. The designation AUSF-F was changed in the meantime to AUSF-F1, after the distinct new model, the AUSF-F2, appeared. A total of 471 AUSF-F tanks were produced from April 1941 to March 1942. AUSF-F2 to AUSF-J on 26 May 1941, mere weeks before Operation Barbarossa. During a conference with Hitler, it was decided to improve the Panzer IV's main armament. Krupp was awarded the contract to integrate again the 50 mm Pak 38L 60 gun into the turret. The first prototype was to be delivered by the 15th of November 1941. Within months, the shock of encountering the Soviet T-34 medium and KV-1 heavy tanks necessitated a new, much more powerful tank gun. In November 1941, the decision to upgun the Panzer IV to the 50 mm gun was dropped, and instead Krupp was contracted in a joint development to modify Rheinmetall's pending 75 mm anti-tank gun design, later known as 7.5 cm Pak 40L 46. Because the recoil length was too great for the tank's turret, the recoil mechanism and chamber were shortened. This resulted in the 75 mm KWK-40L 43. When firing an armor-piercing shell, PZGR-39, the gun's muzzle velocity was increased from 430 meters per second to 750 meters per second. Initially, the gun was mounted with a single-chambered, ball-shaped muzzle brake, which provided just under 50% of the recoil system's braking ability. Firing the Panzergranate 39, the KWK-40L 43 could penetrate 77 mm of steel armor at a range of 1,830 meters. The longer 7.5 cm guns were a mixed blessing. In spite of the designer's efforts to conserve weight, the new weapon made the vehicle nose heavy to such an extent that the forward suspension springs were under constant compression. This resulted in the tank tending to sway even when no steering was being applied, an effect compounded by the introduction of the Ausführung H in March 1943. The AUSF tanks that received the new, longer KWK-40L 43 gun were temporarily named AUSF F2. The tank increased in weight to 23.6 tons. 3 months after beginning production, the Panzer IV AUSF F2 was renamed AUSF G. During its production run from March 1942 to June 1943, the Panzer IV AUSF G went through further modifications, including another armor upgrade. Given that the tank was reaching its viable limit, to avoid a corresponding weight increase, the applique 20mm steel plates were removed from its side armor, which instead had its base thickness increased to 30mm. The weight saved was transferred to the front, which had a 30mm face-hardened applique steel plate welded to the glacis. In total, frontal armor was now 80mm thick. This decision to increase frontal armor was favorably received according to troop reports on 8 November 1942. Despite technical problems of the driving system due to added weight, at this point, it was decided that 50% of Panzer IV production would be fitted with 30mm thick additional armor plates. On 5 January 1943, Hitler decided that all Panzer IV should have 80mm frontal armor. To simplify production, the vision ports on either side of the turret and on the right turret front were removed, while a rack for 2 spare road wheels was installed on the track guard on the left side of the hull. Complementing this, brackets for 7 spare track links were added to the glacis plate. For operation in high temperatures, the engine's ventilation was improved by creating slits over the engine deck to the rear of the chassis, and cold weather performance was boosted by adding a device to heat the engine's coolant, as well as a starter fluid injector. A new light replaced the original headlight and the signal port on the turret was removed. On 19 March 1943, the first Panzer IV with shoes and skirts on its sides and turret was exhibited. The double hatch for the commander's cupola was replaced by a single round hatch from very late model AUSF G, and the cupola was up-armored from 30mm to 95mm. In April 1943, the KWK-40L 43 was replaced by the longer 75mm KWK-40L 48 gun, with a redesigned multi-baffle muzzle brake with improved recoil efficiency. The next version, the AUSF H, began production in June 1943 and received the designation Sd.Kfz.161.The. The integrity of the glacis armor was improved by manufacturing it as a single 80mm plate, to prevent adhesion of magnetic anti-tank mines, which the Germans feared would be used in large numbers by the Allies. Zimmerit paste was added to all the vertical surfaces of the tank's armor. The vehicle side and turret were further protected by the addition of 5mm side skirts and 8mm turret skirts. During the AUSF H's production run, its rubber-tired return rollers were replaced with cast steel. The hull was fitted with triangular supports for the easily damaged side skirts, and the hole in the roof, designed for the Navitider was plugged by a circular armored plate due to shortages of the weapon. These modifications meant that the tank's weight increased to 25 tons. In spite of a new 6-speed Sd.Kfz.161 transmission borrowed from the Panzer III, cross-country speed dropped to as low as 16 km/h on anything but hard, level surfaces. An experimental version of the AUSF-H was fitted with a hydrostatic transmission but was not put into production. Despite addressing the mobility problems introduced by the previous model, the final production version of the Panzer IV, the AUSF-J, was considered a retrograde from the AUSF. Born of German necessity to replace heavy losses, it was greatly simplified to speed production. The electric generator that powered the tank's turret traverse was removed, so the turret had to be rotated manually. The space was later used for the installation of an auxiliary 200-liter fuel tank. Road range was thereby increased to 320 kilometers. The pistol and vision ports in the turret were removed, and the engine's radiator housing was simplified by changing the slanted sides to straight sides. In addition, the cylindrical muffler was replaced by two flame-suppressing mufflers. By late 1944, Zimmerit was no longer being applied to German armored vehicles, and the Panzer IV's side skirts had been replaced by wire mesh, while the number of return rollers was reduced from 4 to 3 to further speed up production. In a bid to augment the Panzer IV's firepower, an attempt was made to mate a Schmalturm turret carrying the longer 75mm L-70 tank gun from the developing Panther USF tank design, and partly developed by Rheinmetall from early 1944 onwards, to a Panzer IV hull. This failed and confirmed that the chassis had reached the limit of its adaptability in both weight and available volume. Production. The Panzer IV was originally intended to be used only on a limited scale, so initially Krupp was its sole manufacturer. Prior to the Polish campaign, only 217 Panzer IVs were produced, 35 a USF A, 42 a USF B, and 140 a USF C. In 1941, production was extended to Wehrmacht and the Nibelungenwerke in the Austrian city of St. Valentin. In 1941, an average of 39 tanks per month were built. This rose to 83 in 1942, 252 in 1943, and 300 in 1944. However, in December 1943, Krupp's factory was diverted to manufacture the Sturmgeschütz IV, and, in the spring of 1944, the Wehrmacht factory began production of the Jagd Panzer IV, leaving the Nibelungenwerke as the only plant still assembling the Panzer IV. With the slow collapse of German industry under pressure from Allied air and ground offensives, in October 1944 the Nibelungenwerke factory was severely damaged during a bombing raid. By March and April 1945, production had fallen to pre-1942 levels, with only around 55 tanks per month coming off the assembly lines. Export. The Panzer IV was the most exported German tank of the Second World War. In 1942, Germany delivered 11 tanks to Romania and 32 to Hungary, many of which were lost on the Eastern Front between the final months of 1942 and the beginning of 1943 during the battles around Stalingrad. Romania received approximately 120 Panzer IV tanks of different models throughout the entire war. To arm Bulgaria, Germany supplied 46 So-91 Panzer IVs, and offered Italy 12 tanks to form the nucleus of a new armored division. These were used to train Italian crews while the Italian dictator Benito Mussolini was deposed, but were retaken by Germany during its occupation of Italy in mid-1943. The Spanish government petitioned for 100 Panzer IVs in March 1943, but only 20 were ever delivered. By December, Finland bought 30, but only received 15 in 1944, and the same year a second batch of 62 or 72 was sent to Hungary. In total, some 297 Panzer IVs of all models were delivered to Germany's allies.